This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neetsahone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I usually rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Sometimes, though, I like to take a look at the other end of the spectrum, and that's what we're doing today, with a look at the worst cards with flying. Flying is one of Magic's original keyword abilities, making its debut in Alpha, and it's a great, simple design. A creature with flying can only be blocked by other creatures with flying. It's pretty powerful, allowing creatures to be unblockable in many situations, and it's gone on to become Magic's most plentiful keyword ability, with over 3,500 cards that have it. Even though flying is a good ability, that doesn't mean that every card that has it is good. In fact, as this list will show you, there are some awful flyers out there. As usual, for a card to make it on one of my worst lists, it has to be bad in Magic's three main play modes, that is 40 card limited, 60 card constructed, and 100 card commander. Additionally, the card has to have always been bad. In other words, for a card to truly be considered one of the worst ever, it has to be bad everywhere and throughout all of Magic's history. Alright, let's dive in with my picks for the 10 worst flyers in Magic. At number 10, it's Crimson Rock. This 2/2 flyer costs 4 generic and a red, a horrific starting point. You never want to be dumping 5 mana into a card that can be killed by numerous 1 mana spells in every format, and that's what we're talking about here. It does have some upside. If it blocks a creature without flying, it gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn, so it's kind of okay as a blocker when it comes to creatures who don't have flying, which is a super weird design, as the thing this flyer is best at is not attacking and not blocking flyers. It also isn't enough to overcome the card's glaring inefficiencies. At number 9, it's Tattered Drake, another 2/2 flyer that costs 5, in this case 4 generic and a blue. Like the Rock, it does come with upside, but not really enough to offset the card's serious problems. You can regenerate it for 1 black mana. That does mean, should you have the mana, it can block reasonably well, just like Crimson Rock can, but it's not capable of killing nearly as many creatures on defense as the Rock is. We're splitting hairs here because both of these cards have awful stat lines and minor upside. At number 8, it's Reaper Falcon. This 1/1 flyer costs 1 generic, a red, and a green, and it has protection from blue. Protection on a creature this small just isn't very meaningful. Sure, it can't be targeted, blocked, or damaged by blue stuff, but your opponent isn't really going to care, even if they are playing blue, because the Falcon isn't the least bit intimidating, especially for 3 mana, 2 of which are different colors. In other words, even in the ideal matchup it isn't good, and when the protection doesn't matter, well, then it's even worse. At number 7, I've got Hawke Moth. This is a 1/2 flyer for 3 generic and a green. Unlike almost everything on this list, the Moth doesn't die to super cheap removal spells because it has Shroud, but who cares? It has a very similar problem to Reaper Falcon in that it might be kind of hard to deal with in the right situation, but it doesn't matter because it's so inefficient. And keep in mind this is Shroud and not hexproof, and that means you can't target it either. So in a lot of ways that's more downside than upside, because the only way to make this horribly statted creature good would be to enhance it, and for the most part you're just not going to be able to do it. At number 6, it's Goblin Derable. Compared to the cards we've seen so far, the Dirigible is a model of efficiency. After all, it's a 4/4 flyer that only costs 6 generic. Problem is, the rest of the text box is downside, and it's a hefty one. It doesn't untap during your untap step. You can get around this by sinking an additional 4 mana into it. That would already not be very good, and the card's almost passable stat line will stop feeling almost passable pretty quickly, but it gets worse. There's a timing restriction. You can only pay that 4 mana during your upkeep. This means you're going into your turn down 4 mana if you ever want to attack a second time with this, and that definitely isn't worth it. At number 5, it's Blistering Flynn. We've seen some pretty bad stat lines so far, but a 4 mana 0/1 flyer is the worst of the bunch. It does have a strictly better form of fire breathing because you can give it +1/+0 for either black or red mana. This does mean it has the potential to crack in for a bunch of damage if you have the mana available and your opponent is completely defenseless, but your 0/1 will go down if your opponent just looks at it funny. Virtually any removal spell and any blocker with reach or flying will kill it, and while the Dyflin can potentially trade with the things that block it, you have to sink so much mana into it just so it can trade that it really defeats the purpose. At number 4, it's Ember Caleff. Easily the most efficient flyer so far, the Caleff costs 2 generic, a red and a blue for a 4/4 with flying and trample. But the rest of the text box is downside, and it is rough. First, it has to attack each turn if able, and second, anytime it damages something, you lose that much life. That is a horrible combination of downsides. Attacking each turn means that you're going to be taking 4 every single turn, and it also means you can't use the Caleff to block. Although, blocking with the Caleff can almost be meaningless since even blocking with it means you're taking 4 damage. It's pretty impossible for you to ever win a race with Ember Wild Caleff because it's going to do a ton of damage to you without your opponent even needing to lift a finger. So if they're doing any damage to you at all on their own, you're going to lose the game before they ever do, and if you're already behind on life, the Caleff will be a godsend for your opponent. At number 3, it's Wind Scouter, another fairly efficient flyer. This one is a 3/3 and it only costs 3 generic and a blue, but of course it comes with a colossal downside. When it attacks or blocks, you return it to its owner's hand. That makes it kind of like Goblin Derable, in that the initial offering doesn't seem too bad, but you're going to have to pay mana over and over and over again for the Wind Scouter to do anything, and what seemed like an okay deal will quickly feel like the worst investment of your life. At number 2, it's Chimney Imp. We're looking at another horrendous stat line, in this case a 1/2 flyer that costs 4 generic and a black. Kind of like with Crimson Rock and Tattered Drake, the Imp does come with upside, but it's nowhere near adequate enough to overcome this even worse stat line. When the Imp dies, your opponent puts a card from their hand on top of their library. That does mean that it can trade 1 for 1, but you're overpaying so hard for the card that it doesn't really matter. And at number 1, I've got Aan Trooper. For an investment of 3 generic and a white, you get a 1/1 flyer. Ouch. That's only slightly better than Blistering Dieflin, and I think the upside here is even more minimal. You can pay 2 generic and a white and discard a card to give it +1/+2 until end of turn. That is incredibly inefficient, even if you remove the discard a card part of the cost. There's actually a little bit of upside to be gained by such a cost, of course, like putting things in your graveyard that you want to reanimate or casting things with madness. But there are so many other cards out there that let you discard without paying a mana cost that this isn't worth it in any way, shape, or form. It's pretty hilarious to compare to another white creature from the same block, Patrol Hound. It costs half the mana, has double the stats, and can discard cards for no cost at all while gaining first strike. So, those are my picks for the 10 worst flyers in Magic. If you want to own any of these cards, because maybe you're putting together a horrible card cube or something like that, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more that look at the worst cards in the game, check out the description and you'll see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.